Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this Skill Up session brought to you by PeopleSir. My name is Cody, and I'd love to welcome you back to another learning experience where we have an exciting program ahead. But before we get things beginning, we do have just a couple of housekeeping notes to go through. First of all, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options for you to do so. The first option is the chat tab. So I'd like you to go ahead and test out that function for us right now by letting us know from where in the world you are joining. Now, if you have any specific questions for us, we do want you to send those into the Q&A tab. This is going to be kind of a moderated Q&A session back and forth, so we do want you to send your questions in early and often, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can today. Our topic for today is Core Platform Engineering Concepts Explained, and I'm joined by Turja Chaudhary, Assistant Director of Cloud Platforms at EY, Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong Group, and Sharon Florentine, Managing Editor here at Techstrong Group. So Turja, Sharon, and Mike, thank you all so much for joining us today. But Sharon, would you like to go ahead and get this conversation rolling?
I would love to. Thank you, Cody. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to jump right in and ask you both for a little background, first of all. Why don't we start with what the heck platform engineering is in the first place? Why the heck are we here? What are we talking about? Turji, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sharon. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons that we are trying to set this session up, right? And kind of answer this basic question about what is this platform engineering stuff. And to be very fair, there are textbook definitions. For example, you might find many of the sites and many of the white papers define platforms as kind of like this is a discipline in a sense of designing and building internal developer platforms, tool chains, and workflows that kind of enable a self-service, automated way for software organizations to kind of build and deploy reusable software. But at a very high level, how I think of it is that normally, if you kind of think about a platform, it's an abstraction on top of what you already had. So say, for example, you have a cloud service provider like, say, Azure. So maybe earlier you were going into the portal, Azure portal, or using Terraform or something and building the infrastructure. Then you use some sort of a source control like GitHub, do some sort of CI/CD and deploy. That is what normal applications deployment kind of comprises of. But rather than doing everything from scratch, the platform will help you kind of shift down some of the work. So it will reduce the overall cognitive load of your developers so that they don't have to do n number of things. Some of the undifferentiated lifting will be done by the platform. So the platform could, for example, provide you a self-service offering, a marketplace where you can just go and click and deploy a Kubernetes cluster. So you don't need to know how that cluster got created. You just give a few inputs and the platform in the back end has automation and abstractions that kind of does that for you. So at the end of the day, it makes the life of engineers easier. And that is one of the reasons many organizations are now coming and together to build this kind of platforms, which will compose of reusable assets, reusable building blocks, workflows, automated tool chains that can help developers be more productive, faster, and reduce their overall cognitive load.
Okay. I would add two things to that. One is we're trying to figure out how to share best practices. If I look across an enterprise, there's 10 different DevOps teams, and each one of them is good at one particular thing, but we have a hard time capturing that and sharing that in a way that makes it a reusable idea for the rest of the team. So if I centralize that, it becomes easier to operationalize those best practices across a larger number of teams. And then I also think that there is simply a total cost issue here that's at work, because each of those teams is running a different CI/CD. They are running different tools, and each one of those things winds up adding cost to the total equation. So this creates an opportunity to kind of bring in, shall we say, a little adult supervision to the whole process.
Right. How much of it, too, is about standardization and making sure that all of those disparate teams are using the same tools across the enterprise?
Yes. See, what I would like to again maybe kind of take back on what Mike is saying. I completely agree with him. So, what we want a platform to be is not something mandatory. So, we don't want that, okay, a developer has to use it. Rather, we want this concept of, for example, habitable platforms or sustainable platforms. So, when I say habitable or sustainable platform, this is a platform which has good developer experience, is easy to use. Obviously, it standardizes. So what I like to say is that the death of enterprises is modularity or options. So enterprises don't normally want to have a lot of options. There are CTOs who I know who have actually said that, okay, every single program in my organization has to be on .NET or has to be on Java, for example. That is the level of standardization. There are people who are saying, no, everything has to be on Azure unless and until there is a huge need to go to AWS. So obviously platform is an abstraction on top of your standardization. So all of your standard principles, your standard architecture, say for example, as a company, you like synchronous messaging patterns for this kind of use cases and asynchronous messaging patterns for something else. So now with the platform, you have a chance to encode and inject all of those abstractions, those standard patterns into building blocks so that any new developer can kind of go into and develop it quickly. So platforms are opinionated. That is what it is, because you cannot have a very flexible platform, because then you are just allowing everybody to do what they want to do. So then at the end of it, it's not like that platform. But at the same time, it should not be something that kind of encourages you down just one path. So that is kind of the balance, that sweet spot that the technology leadership has to find, that you encourage innovation, but at the same time you don't have a lot of proliferation.
I think part of that equation too is that for those of you who play golf, this is a giant mulligan. We talk about, the idea that, let's be honest, DevOps, we try to automate as many things as we can, but if you go talk to folks, there's just lots of manual processes and bottlenecks and things that have emerged over the years. And this is an opportunity to say, hey, let's just start over and do it right the first time. Because a lot of times, we're trying to hold up a platform that was constructed by people who are no longer with the company 10 years ago, and we have a million scripts and they may or may not be documented, so we may or may not know what's going on, and things tend to break off and than we like to admit.
Yeah, good point. And that's a great segue into talking about what's driving this embrace of platform engineering. So what are the forces that are behind this? Obviously, Mike was talking about, trying to do the mulligan, the reset, but what else is behind this?
True. No, I personally feel one of the driving factors is obviously, like you said, that at the end of the day, business wants to improve their margins, right? That is what the C-suite is kind of looking for. And for that, you need some sort of ways to deploy digital assets quicker, faster, more secure. At the same time, you don't want to compromise with security. So platform kind of ticks all of those boxes to some extent. So as you can see, you have standard patterns, reusable patterns, building blocks that you can use more and more. So, but at the same time, a platform needs to have a few. You cannot just have a script that automates something and call it a platform. So there are some basic tenets that a platform needs to follow. And considering it has followed that, then obviously it should be a way for you to encapsulate all of your standardized patterns. Another thing is you avoid duplication. So it's not like when a company knows that there is a platform, what we have seen within EY also is that people tend to first see that, okay, is this offering available within the platform? So automatically that duplication reduces and your reuse KPIs kind of start increasing. Security by default. So when you are creating something, you are using a component from the platform. Again, I am going back to the cognitive load of a developer or an engineer. So as a developer, today already we have to do so many things. Now, if I also have to think about security of the Kubernetes cluster where I'm deploying my application, is just another thing. So if, for example, I can offset it or shift it down to the platform team, then that's awesome, right? So that's like security by default. All of the minimum security baselines that your company security officer has kind of enforced, your CISO, are already injected into your building block. So you don't need to think about security every time. And obviously, it has to make the life of your developers easier. So that is what when I talk to people who want to build platforms, this is what I said, that should be a North Star metric, reducing the overall cognitive load, and everything else will follow. So you will start getting all of those reuse KPIs, all of those margins, quicker to market. The more satisfied your developers are, so the more easier you can help developers kind of be productive. So just as an example, when Spotify developed their platform, the key metric they were trying to measure was the time to 10th PR. So the 10th pull request, how long does it take? So initially it used to take 42 days. Once they started that platform, it drastically reduced to something around 20. So it's a good metric, for example, just one of the few. So if your developers are able to use the platform to build digital assets quicker, then that's like another big driver for your platform adoption initiatives or platform engineering initiatives.
To Terja's point, the buy-in for developers is a huge part of this equation, right? Because every developer ultimately wants their cake and eat it too, and they want the development environment to be whatever tools they want to use that week. But that means that you wind up driving the cost of the thing, and everybody goes crazy. But so what we're really saying is, look, if you give up a certain amount of flexibility, we will all benefit greatly, but we're not going to impose too many things that are too hard or too strict, because otherwise then it winds up just being kind of, IT, the centralized force that we rebelled against in the first place with DevOps trying to reassert some control, and everybody kind of starts pushing back. So you really have to build what I would call, a new DevOps social contract with the developers and get them to buy into the whole idea and explain it to them. And that cultural issue may be 3/4 of the battle. I don't think they're going to argue with you about the tools per se all that much, so long as they understand the why.
Yeah. Makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, DevOps too required a massive cultural shift and mindset shift too. So we may as well just keep shifting. So we started talking about the obstacles. So let's keep going. Besides the cultural stuff, besides the flexibility stuff, what else are we up against here in the shift to platform engineering, or the potential shift?
So see, obviously platform adoption itself is a problem. So once you have the platform, making the enterprise adaptive, it's a problem. Creating a platform is also something not very easy, to be very fair. I mean, it all depends upon what you call a platform. So there is a concept of TVP, thinnest viable platform. So that's where you just say, for example, have a wiki page, and you can even think of it as a platform, as long as that wiki page gives you good guidance on how to create, say, a microservice architecture. So in that case, that itself is a platform by some constructs. Whereas then you can go as long and as much as you want, and you can have, say, for example, $1 million investments into very kind of comprehensive end-to-end platforms. So everybody, what we have seen when we talk to clients is that everybody wants a platform, but many people don't want to invest in a platform, so to speak. And then there are options also where you don't need to create everything from scratch. There are vendors, for example, Port, Backstage, open source product, many things you can kind of cobble together to create platforms. So there are very different options, but obviously budgeting for a platform is a little bit complicated. It has to come from some sort of a central budget, because this is not something that will directly, for example, help a business. It's not a business product, for example, that a business is asking for, right? It's more like coming out of the central IT or the central, some sort of a central budget. But that's where the leadership comes in, right? They have that vision that, guys, this will help me be more successful, more agile. My key metrics of lead time will decrease, my organization will become leaner as a whole. So overall, I will have that economies of scale, but for now I need to invest. So that is one that we have seen. Another thing is like Mike was saying, that social construct, kind of like a contract between the developers and the platform engineers, for example. So that's sort of a trust, right? That, okay, you are kind of offloading some part of your activity to somebody else who theoretically might do it better than that. But again, you are introducing another set of dependencies. So for example, we have had many conversations where developers say, guys, you have introduced this new layer above Azure. So what if this layer breaks? If I would have directly used Azure, maybe the thing would have worked, because I would have called my APIs. Now you have this another abstraction. So it's just another thing that can break in the. So that concept of trust and having it kind of inside is also. So, and another thing also is what you will see in big enterprises is that concept of platform proliferation. So when people don't like a platform, many organizations will have silos, and they will create another platform. So you will see, for example, there will be enterprises where I've seen that just the data ingestion, meaning getting the data from a client, ingesting it into your ecosystem. There are 9 to 10 different ingestion platforms just doing the same thing. So kind of coming up with that, and that is where the leadership plays a role, right? You come up with one strategic platform of your choice, and then you gradually embed all of those associated ecosystem products into that platform as much as possible. Obviously, as a platform, you might also say that, okay, it's not just one way of data ingesting data. I can have three ways of ingesting data, right? So the three ways, and you offer all of them as complementary and say, okay, you can have a flow chart, for example, okay, for this kind of use case, use this, for this kind of use case. But that's also another problem that I have personally faced, is this concept of platform proliferation, everybody trying to build their own platform, kind of that, whose platform is better and all of that.
Right.
I would add to that one other thing. I'm almost certain that 99.9% of the DevOps pipelines that are out there are not portable. And as such, you're going to have all these workflows that you've created that you're going to have to maybe rewrite onto some new platform that's a modern platform. So the upside is you get a platform that's easier to manage. But the technical debt is going to be there. It doesn't just magically happen. Somebody's got to go in there and actually, write these new scripts and these new pipelines and kind of make sure they're optimized. You may discover that half the pipelines you have you don't need, but at the very least, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Cost has come up a number of times, and Georgia, you were talking about ROI and measuring that return. So what goes into measuring that? How do you really nail that down and make the case for this is going to save us money and be more efficient?
No, I mean, yeah, that's a difficult thing to crack, to be very fair. It's not, I mean, so there are teams even within a platform. So for example, within the overall office of the CTO, you will have somebody like the strategy team. The technology strategy team will kind of come up with this business use case for having a platform, which we kind of encode into a document calling the platform strategy. At a very high level, what you want from your platform is, you don't expect your internal platform to be profitable. As long as you can recover what you are spending, it's still okay, to be very fair, because it's at the end of the day, this platform is helping you build products, and then you sell those products to the client, and that is where you want to kind of earn those margins. As long as you have a sustainable platform that can at least recover the work that you are doing and give you enough money to keep on innovating, introduce new offerings, it's good. So from platform perspective, you need to have a good cost model and good recovery model, and you need to ensure that, okay, these products are getting recovered, and what is the recovery percentage, track it quarter to quarter. Another key metric is having the adoption percentage. There are other KPIs also that enterprises have. There is one KPI that many enterprises kind of try to determine, is the reuse KPI, how much reuse hours you have saved. So that's also another important KPI. So for example, let's take an example of a platform which helps you create a virtual machine, right? So every time that automation is running and you get a fully functional virtual machine with all of the agents installed, you have, for example, joined to the domain. So normally it used to take 4 hours to build that from scratch, and now it takes you half an hour. So basically your reuse KPI has increased from half hour to 4, so 3.5 hours so then you multiply it with the number of times that automation ran, and you can come up with some sort of a number, right, that I saved this many of hours, and then you have a threshold. So there are many ways. Then, for example, like I was saying, the DORA metrics, which are very well known, lead time and all of that, you can measure that for every single project. There are tools like Propello, so you can install Propello on your ADO, and you can see, okay, before adopting the platform, how long it used to take me to send releases. Now after adopting the platform, how much it takes. Then, for example, another key metric is the developer onboarding metric, meaning how fast can I onboard a new developer, which is, so for example, every day, normally if you see, there are assessments or surveys have been done, and it seems that normally a developer takes 60 to 80 days to become actually productive after joining so because that's so much he has to understand, right? So with platforms, if you can even reduce it half, then you are actually saving a month's salary of the developer, so to speak. So that's another key metric, how fast you are able to onboard developers. So in a sense, there are quite a few metrics. It's not very publicized or well, and it comes kind of like you have to find those numbers which make sense for your business. I have not seen something even in the CNCF paper like these are the 10 things you should measure. And again, another thing that I want to emphasize here is that one of the best practices of having platform as a product, all of the metrics that you used to use traditionally to measure that your product is doing well, you can actually use all of the same metrics for the platform also. So So that's something that we do, because then your problem kind of reduces, because product management is a very well known, right? Much better known than, say, platform management.
I think there's also two audiences for the ROI discussion, right? And the first one is, say, a CIO, and you need that level of detail that Terj is talking about. The other one is the CFO, and you don't need nearly as much detail for those guys. You basically need to show them some sort of rationalization model that says we were going to no longer spend money on X to pay for Y, and when we finally finish this thing, we'll be at a lower cost. And then the other thing to stress to those guys is visibility, right? The truth of the matter is most of the business has no real visibility into what's going on with software development, even though they know that revenue is tied to software development more so than ever. We've been talking about things like value stream management and all this stuff for years. And the reason it doesn't happen is because there's too many platforms and it's too complex to kind of sort. So now we're in a position where we can actually go implement those kinds of things if we have a consistent standard platform. And so I would just go down to the finance guys and say, hey, in addition, we can provide you some visibility into what's going on in software development, and you'll probably get an immediate thank you, go for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, go ahead. Oh, all right. Hallucination.
He must be an AI bot then.
So here's the important question. Where does security fit into this? Torja, you mentioned this a little while ago, touched on it, but how does this encourage a more secure approach?
Oh, perfect. Exactly. So see, the platform is, in a sense, the kind of reflects the security posture of your enterprise, right? So the platform encodes or injects all of the security practices, all of the security patterns. Say, for example, in your enterprise, you have a kind of like a regulation or a security compliance rule or something like that. Okay, all my storage accounts needs to be encrypted. Right. Now, when you encode that into the platform, you ensure that whenever my automation runs and creates a storage account, it's by default encrypted. So that's the concept of security by default. Injecting all of the minimum security baselines that is mandated by your organization, by your cybersecurity team, by your InfoSec team, and injecting them into those automations, into those processes, into that overall thing, that and the entire asset that I'm deploying becomes secure. That is one perspective. The other perspective is you also offer security tooling as part of the platform. And again, this is opinionated. So for example, you might say that as part of the platform, I am offering Sneak, just as a security vendor. Say, for example, you offer Sneak for container scanning. You offer, say, White Source or Mint for OSS scanning. So these are also assets that you are offering as a tool, so that the developers can ensure that the code they have written, the containers they have created, the container images they have coded, they are more secure. So this is kind of the second layer of security. And the third layer of security is basically once the normally, for example, even in many enterprises, what we have seen that you have the infrastructure, right? And then you have the code on top of that. So at least if you have already by default secure infrastructure or the secure offerings kind of on which you are building your application, then the only thing that is left to secure is the code, and you're offering tooling. So you're kind of handling everything. Then, for example, there are enterprises which might even offer cloud security posture management tooling, Azure Defender, for example, for storage, for containers, work with different vendors and kind of inject them. It could be even, for example, you are offering external clients to be onboarded, external client identities to be onboarded via Azure B2B. So this is, for example, you are offering a standard solution across entire spectrum. It could be the infrastructure security, it could be the code security, the developer tooling security, it could even be the identity security. So at every layer, because the platform, that is a good thing about the platform, because it touches every layer of your application stack, you can inject security into every layer based on the kind of the nature of the layer, so to speak.
All right. And you need to remember too that the board is looking to the CISO and saying, we need to secure our software supply chain. We have no idea how it works. And then they tell them, go down and find out from the CTO or the CIO or the head of DevOps how this whole thing works. And the security people show up, and they are not software developers. So, but the first thing that's always on their mind is, well, how big is the attack surface that I need to defend? It's always the first question. And when they start looking around and they go, well, how many of these CI/CD platforms do we have, and how many of these other things do we have? And you start telling them we have 3, 4, or 5. In their minds, they've just come to Crazyville. They're like, I'm not going to defend all these things. It's not feasible. So they're going to, from their perspective, it comes back to the ROI discussion. It is helpful to also say, hey, we're going to reduce the total cost of security because we're going to shrink the number of platforms that need to be defended, and that brings the total cost down.
Security, cost, all ties together.
Security is not free.
That is true. That is very true.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here's the other big elephant in the room. Excuse me. AI. How does AI fit into platform engineering? And can we maybe talk about use cases, applications, where it's already being used, where we see this going?
Yeah, sure. So again, obviously there is a lot of excitement about AI and even Gen AI, to be very fair, in particular ChatGPT part and all of that. So at the end of the day, what you want to do, just like everything else, you want to treat AI as just another stream, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel just because it's AI, right? Just like you handle, for example, all of the other digital assets, digital capabilities or frameworks within your enterprise. So that's where, again, just like everything else, platform gives you that standard way, for example, even of developing AI assets. So for example, as a firm, you want to develop something, for example, on top of ChatGPT, but with your own data. So if you have an AI layer within your overall platform, which kind of helps you with those building blocks, those automations that can help you build kind of standard patterns. It enforces some of those ethical AI guidelines on privacy, data residency, and all of that. So basically, just like every other part of your overall tech stack, AI just becomes another part of the overall tech stack that is offered as part of the platform. And by that, it's secured, it's protected, and all of the good things that a platform gives. So this is one aspect. But at the other time, it can also be, for example, you are using some aspects of AI to even increase the adoption of the platform. For example, you can now have a GPT kind of ChatGPT kind of a bot which tells people how to use your platform. So rather than people having to understand, so this is the other aspect. This is kind of consuming the platform or adopting the platform. So where you are kind of asking the bot, for example, I want to use your platform to develop a web application on Java. What should I do? And that and kind of like say GitHub Copilot, it assists you, kind of like a platform Copilot. It helps you kind of on your journey of adopting the platform, building products using the platform. So this is the second. Third thing that we have also seen is that many of these enterprises, they want to inject. See, AI, at least Gen AI, has again kind of changed the game in a sense that they have removed the technical barriers. So now business leaders are directly coming up and saying, guys, we want to build this on using ChatGPT, for example, right? So that barrier that normally used to have, that business used to come to tech and tech used to take the best decision, that is kind of going away with some of the aspects of Gen AI. So what this in a sense will actually also help you is kind of come up with a sort of a framework, kind of sort of some basic principles that, guys, if you want to do this, this is the way to do it. Otherwise, we will not let you even do this, for example, because we don't want somebody in some silo of the enterprise coming up with a ChatGPT kind of a bot, releasing it, and then it starts hallucinating, or it has privacy issues or bias and all of that, because these are actual issues, right, which you want to control. And the platform is a very, very good place to kind of funnel all of your requests, ensure that all of the controls are kind of put in place, and then you kind of enhance the power of your digital AI assets using the entire thing of the platform. And the last part, what I have seen is that people don't have as many, say, for example, AI engineers as they, for example, have AI assets, DevOps engineers or normal Java developers, for example, right? So there is an actual shortage of AI or machine learning stuff. So what you can actually enable as part of your platform is that you can, for example, have some sort of a place, just like Hugging Face has all of those models. You can have some enterprise models where, for example, it's a catalog of your AI assets, which are already pre-approved, which people can just kind of consume. So say, for example, somebody just wants to integrate a chatbot. okay, on some sort of a knowledge base, right? You don't want them to kind of build everything from scratch. They go to your marketplace of AI assets, so to speak, and then you kind of go there. Or for example, you have something which prompt base is doing publicly. You have a list of pre-approved prompts in some sort of a prompt marketplace. So where I, as a business analyst, I will go and check that, okay, what is the best prompt to get my SQL data into a Power BI dashboard. So I will go and get that prompt, run that prompt against my data and get that. So there are many ways to be very fair that you can inject AI at different levels and get good benefits out of it.
Yeah, there's two caveats to think about. If you are going to use any of these general purpose generative AI platforms, make sure you check that box that says don't share my data and don't use your data to train their model, because you'll know where your data will wind up eventually. And then secondarily, to Terja's point, we are going to see everybody who builds a DevOps platform is going to build some sort of large language model for optimization around generative AI capabilities that they add using the data that they have. And you're also going to, in time, going to be able to build your own LLMs, because while the OpenAI thing is massive, we're going to see a shift where we're going to see smaller LLMs that are basically trained using a much narrower set of data. And then I can get some optimizations that are specific to my environment or specific to my vertical industry and use cases. So, keep your eye on all of that. But the pace of that is happening rapidly. And, by this time next year, maybe we'll all be talking about, how many LLMs we have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the domain specific push is really accelerating. So one of the things that comes up in relation to platform engineering a lot is, ITSM and IDLE, and there's some similarities that I see between these two practices. So do you think that IDLE, DevOps, platform engineering, how do you think this is going to converge? Do you think this is going to converge?
Yes. So to be very, I mean, I have seen many engaging discussions on this topic. But at the same time, working on a platform team for the last 2.5 years, I have actually never seen any conflict, which I have more seen in, say, for example, Reddit discussions on all of that topic. Because I personally believe that these are isolated stuff, right? I mean, none of the other stuff goes away just because you have a platform. So for example, even if you have a platform, let's say you have a very nice kind of a platform, but still you need that platform in itself does not serve any business value. Right. So you need to build digital assets, digital enablers, data products on top of that platform. So the moment you build a product on top of a platform, you need DevOps engineers, for example, to build that product using the platform. Earlier, you are using some vendor or some third party, but now they're using your platform to build the product. Once you build the product, you have all of the same concepts of having, say, for example, ticketing, SLAs, SLOs, all of the P1, P2, P3, the entire ITSM process, change requests, none of that changes. I mean, even with very big mature platforms, you don't actually get rid of, for example, you need to have a change request to deploy in production, right? So that is one aspect. I feel that just because you have a platform does not change the after process of building the product on the platform. It just gives you different tools to work with. That is one aspect. Another aspect is the platform itself. So if you see, for example, a platform, the platform will have its own DevOps engineers. It will have its own ServiceNow kind of a ticketing queue. It will have its own SLAs. It will have its own change management process. So platform itself will also kind of follow those standard ITSM or ITL guidelines, so to speak. Most of the platforms where I have personally worked on, they have the standard process, because the moment you treat your platform as a product, all of the good practices, all of the good, say, whether you call it agile or ITSM or whatever practices that as an organization you chose to follow for products will automatically be applied on the platform. You cannot say, okay, just because I have a platform, I don't want to have, say, for example, a change request or change management process, just as an example. Everything stays the same. It's just that you now have a new tool, a much better kind of a platform and abstraction to work with. But all of the processes, which were good processes, should stay. And yes, obviously, if you find that with platforms, for example, many teams who have platforms are now embracing this inner source kind of an approach, where they're saying that I cannot have so many teams working on every single asset that you need. So rather, I will build a framework. If you want something as part of the platform, you build it and you contribute it back. So this might be a good thing that came out of having a platform. So embrace the good thing, remove whatever was not working for you, but that's not just because of the platform. That's just how enterprises work, right?
Right. I tend to agree with that. There's a philosophical argument that goes on between the idle and the DevOps folks. The idle folks will say, the issue with DevOps is it doesn't enable you to manage IT at scale successfully. And the DevOps folks will say, idle's too damn slow. And by the time we build anything in idle, the business case has gone by. The truth of the matter is somewhere in between. If you look at the IDLE 4 framework, they have cribbed a lot of the Agile framework and kind of stuck it in there with an IDLE spin on it a little bit to help bridge that. But to Terja's point on a practical matter, even DevOps engineers are using graphical tools from time to time to fix something because sometimes it's just quicker. And at the same time, we don't have enough DevOps engineers, so we need IT admins to be able to participate in the workflow process. And of course, they don't have programming skills. So we need to give them a graphical tool that lets them manage something. It becomes this kind of mix and match scenario where most organizations are using some sort of hybrid thing between a DevOps workflow and an idle workflow to get the job done, because you can't rely on either one entirely to manage IT at scale. It seems that that's just a practical matter. I don't know, Terja, if you're seeing the same thing or what.
Yeah, exactly. So I would even go a step further, is that, I mean, as an enterprise, do we even need to think about all of this, as long as, in a sense, the business deliverable is being delivered, right? To be very fair, I just because I have introduced, say, for example, a CI/CD pipeline, I don't want to change, for example, a process that the business is comfortable with. So, for example, even if I have a CD pipeline that can actually deploy to production just by a click, do I really want to avoid that change management process? Maybe not, maybe yes. So even though the platform might unlock some potential capabilities, it's also about the maturity of the overall team. So even if you have, for example, automated infra provisioning, there are, for example, pipelines that you can use just, for example, to delete infrastructure or delete a subscription, for example. But many times you will see that people are not very comfortable with using it, because even if the technology is there, we still kind of like that comfort of having, say, for example, some of the manual checks and all of that to ensure everything is kind of in place. So I mean, it's, for example, what we preach is that as long as it works, you kind of do it. As I was saying, that the enterprise as a whole will have a few principles, right? I mean, some technology principles, that this is some of the things that you should adhere to, which are obviously, we'll see most of the enterprise principles. For example, the UK government, they had actually released publicly all of their enterprise principles, which are very nice to read, right? But they're very high level. The reason they're high level is that they give you that ability to kind of change it or refactor it based on your business vertical. So that's also how we kind of sell platforms, right? I mean, we are giving you this kind of basic capabilities, and then you kind of do whatever you want on top of that. We don't want to, in a sense, opinionate a lot of things. Obviously, it will have an opinionated approach, but at the same time, we don't want to force a lot of things that, okay, just because you are using the platform, you have to get rid of your entire ITL process that you are using, because then many people will not like it. It's more like an enabler. Use it wherever you can, and it has to be a modular nature. You use some part of the platform, you don't use some part of the platform, and it's okay, as long as the overall platform is getting adopted and you get in that recovery margin so that you can keep on innovating.
Cool. So I'm going to go back to, God, excuse me, one of my favorite topics, developer experience, that we have talked about a couple times here, but let's really dig into this. So there's a balance, right, that has to be struck between innovation and centralized management. And how much weight do you give to developers who are asking for certain things, who need a certain kind of experience? And how much weight do you give to that need for the centralization? And then how does that tie into developer experience as a whole? Are you alienating folks? Are you not? I think this is kind of going to bring us back full circle a little bit to the beginning of the conversation when we talked about, what all this really meant. So at least that's where I'm hoping we'll go. I don't know.
Exactly. So maybe I can take the first step. So this is, first of all, very complicated. Okay. I mean, developer experience or developer productivity itself is an extremely complicated. There have been enough research papers written on that. trying to understand what developer productivity means, how to measure it at a very high level. So there are some good frameworks. For example, there is a space framework that I like personally, which kind of gives you some of the metrics, key metrics that you can ensure to understand what is the developer productivity or developer experience. Because many people will kind of try to reduce it to the aspect of, okay, my bug count reduced, or I could deploy faster. That means my developers are very happy. That might not always be the case. So what I say, for example, when I talk on this topic, is that the overall idea of having your platform is to reduce the cognitive load of your developers. That I completely agree with that. And that can only happen if you have a good, easy to use, good developer experience. You are treating your developers and family and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, platforms will be opinionated, right? So there will have to be some sort of an opinionated. But what we try to do, for example, is that even though we have an opinionated kind of an approach, so for example, say I think that the best way for my company to build a microservice architecture will be, for example, using this .NET framework and deploy it on a Kubernetes cluster. Say, for example, that is how. So what I will do as part of my platform I will give a very easy to use or a very easy to consume way of doing this workflow. So I will have a full end-to-end workflow where you can very easily kind of bootstrap all of the pieces, deploy your code. So that is kind of, so if you follow my opinionated path, then you get this kind of frictionless way to deploy stuff, which obviously will delight any developer. One section of the developer who likes this opinion will follow it. But then, say, for example, comes another developer who says, no, I don't want to do this. I want to do some sort of an event-driven architecture. We still give them the tools, but maybe we don't have that good a developer experience for that part of the flow, because as a platform I cannot accommodate all of those different kind of nuances, right? So I might choose that as, and this is where the leadership comes in place. So we might choose patterns. For example, okay, we see what work has this enterprise worked on for the last 5 years. We see, okay, traditionally 95% of the applications are .NET based, only 5% of Java, and maybe say 2% is, for example, Go. So then it makes much more sense rationally and from a business perspective to invest in better workflows, better experience for .NET. So then we might choose, okay, the standard ID is Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, for example, and we will integrate, we will create plugins and extensions based on that thought process. That does not mean we don't want. So say, for example, a Java developer is coming in and he wants to develop, we should have some sort of a way for him to still procure NetBeans or, for example, JetBrains or whatever. They should still have that process, but obviously there needs to be some sort of rationalization. So, for example, what we also tend to do is when people are going, we try to also ask them that, guys, what is it, why you are trying to use this language or why you are trying to use this framework? Is it because you are more comfortable there? That makes sense. Or is it because you are thinking that this cannot be done here? So that is where some sort of time what happens is that you need another team within your platform, which is called the platform adoption team. Okay, and that is the team, basically kind of a small set of consultants within the overall platform. So if your platform is 100 people who are building the products, it's just a 5 products who people who kind of like working as a pre-sale / consulting arm of your platform, and who works, understands with your developers, guys, this is all of the capabilities that the platform has. Why don't you rationalize to this? Obviously, this is kind of not as easy process. You just tell them and they do. But over time, they might kind of conform to the standard way of doing this, which I say is the standard way for for the majority of the application. So that is where developer experience lies. If I can, for example, follow the Pareto rule, which is the 80-20 rule, right? Even if, for example, I can do some of them, the majority of the people who are doing the development will be a few set of developers who are kind of contributing to the biggest projects. If, for example, I can tackle the big project, the biggest project, which is say 150 developers working on a .NET code, that's good enough for me to, in a sense, start with, and then I kind of get the rest along later. So developer experience is still number one from my perspective. 100%, nothing beats it. You need to have a good developer experience, a sustainable, habitable environment. But at the end of the day, it's complicated. So there is like, I don't think there is like one easy way to get this right.
Yeah.
I feel we've lost sight of the entire issue because, people are human, right? And everybody wants to be measured on something they control. So we obsess about, things like DORA metrics because that's what the DevOps team owns and controls. But I would argue, that's like looking through the wrong end of the telescope. What you really want to think about is what is the developer productivity you're enabling in terms of, are we producing more software that winds up in production with a higher quality and is secure? And those are the things that we're measuring. And so, when you say developer experience, it's not necessarily all about whether or not the developers are quote unquote happy. It's more about what is the business outcome that relates to all this, that you can justify the whole development process. And I think, the DevOps team over the years has kind of lost a little sight of that. There's a little bit of a gap between them and the developers that they serve. And so when we say lighten their cognitive load, it's more than just making them happy. It's also about how are we making the whole thing more efficient, because there's always somebody out there going, why are we building this ourselves when we can go buy something else? And so that, that's where the push pull is always in these conversations. And we need to kind of get back to that and say, hey, folks, this is why it matters. Software is driving the business. You are an X company that, happens to make something, but you build software to drive that. And we need to understand all that. But somewhere along the line, we kind of got lost in the metrics noise.
Somewhere around the ping pong tables and the beer Fridays, maybe.
Somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it went wrong, but
no, that's a great point. That all of this ends up with outcomes, business outcomes. That's what we're the platforms, the processes, the people that you're hopefully enabling to be more productive. It's all to drive business outcomes. So go ahead. Sorry.
Just one thing. So, for example, the GitHub team, okay, they actually did a very nice survey, kind of, and where they were not going by the traditional metrics, right? So they were kind of doing some sort of a survey for a select group of, and they have published that survey as a research paper, which is very nice. It has been presented in some conferences, and also it's publicly available. So what they actually did at the end of the day is they selected a subset of a lot of developers, and then they said, guys, that we will send you a survey every day. At the end of the day, we will kind of ask you that, okay, what it is you are doing, right? I mean, just asking that question, it seems what happened that after within the 30 days, they noticed the trend that by just asking a question, they did not change anything in the back end, so to speak, right? Just asking the question, just making the developer feel that their voice also kind of mattered. Just that fact of just asking the question itself showed a growth on all of the other metrics, for example. So that is a cool analysis, for example, that they did, which is like, just if you kind of listen to the developers enough. So because see, at the end of the day, every company has now in a sense become a software company, right? That is what Warner Burgers is saying, right? I mean, software is eating the world and all of that. So at the end of the day, the human force is kind of becoming your biggest asset, right? I mean, as long as you have a quantifiable way, an easy way, for example, for people to be productive on your platform, right? So that's why I say that the platform, the focus of the primary focus that we enforce from a platform perspective is my platform helping people onboard easily, right? I mean, as a new developer, when I join my team, does it help you build products faster? That is why Spotify started measuring that time to 10th PR kind of a metric, right? So because that kind of shows you that, guys, okay, then obviously all of the good things come, then all of your requests will come, your user stories will come. But if, for example, you are quicker to react, your platform provides you all of the tooling in a centralized place, it provides you all of those patterns. And what I have seen when I've spoken to developers, for example, as part of our internal platform initiative, is that most of the developers I have seen are much more inclined, and they're more than happy to give up some sort of a control also if need be, if, for example, they can offset some part of their work outside, right? I mean, to a platform or some component. I have never seen a single developer complain. Most of them have been amazingly amenable, in a sense that they have been more than accommodating enough. I mean, for example, wherever we have seen problems, we have seen the developers come and help us fix them and say, okay, that's okay, this happens. It's not that they are saying that I will not use the platform. So if you have a reasonably good platform, then most likely your developers will use it, most likely, unless and until there are some pockets here and there, like Mike was saying, that obviously they will say, I want to do it my own way, and there will always be people like that. But at an overall, if you have a good level of user experience, you are kind of ticking all of the right boxes, you have good level of automation, you're giving them a cohesive set of tools, more than many developers or DevOps engineers are more than happy, for example, to move from Jenkins to ADO if this, and that is what happens, right? Say, for example, you are working on Jenkins 14 years, then you get a new job opportunity. You can't go to the interview and say, guys, are you using ADO? If they say, no, I am not using ADO, I will just not take the job. That's not how IT works, right? So you have to learn that, right? And so more and more people are okay to do it, as long as you have that kind of ground set of rules that we are trying to talk about, and then I think people will be more than happy to adopt it.
All right. regardless of what political persuasion you are, there was a great speech that Bill Clinton gave when he was running for president in his first term, and it basically is titled, "I Feel Your Pain." Find that speech and just crib it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, final 10 minutes, wrapping up. How do you implement this? If you are not yet taking platform engineering approach in your software teams, how do you make this happen?
So yeah, so from my perspective, as I was saying that this is not a very easy task, to be very fair. I mean, there has to be some sort of a central buy-in, central leadership buy-in to at least come up with the first platform. So what I normally encourage people, and again, when I, for example, join a company, I first try to find whether there are enablers like a platform. So this is from the concept of me as a developer or as an engineer. So whenever I will do something rather than inventing the wheel, for example, I will try to find usable patterns, components, and if I search well enough and if the platform is well documented enough, I will find it, right? So if there is a platform, you don't need to really think about building another one. It makes no sense. Rather, there should be a way of, in a sense, communicating back. So for example, you might have an AHA portal, right, where you ask people to give ideas that, guys, I want this feature in the platform, and then you prioritize something. So this is part of the consumer. Now, say for example, there is no platform and somebody needs to build it. That is when I'm saying that you can start as simple as, for example, the concept of the guys who wrote the book on team topologies. He actually came up with this concept of this thinnest viable platform, TVP, right? And the concept is, it is just a wiki page. It's better than nothing, right? It has all of your documented, all of your principles, all of your practices. That is one phase. Then obviously, as you get budget, many times when we are pitching the idea of having platforms, many people are not very interested in, again, building everything from scratch, obviously, right? Because it's a time taking effort. The budget is also, in this constrained market, is not a very easy thing to get. So then there are vendors also now. For example, Humanitech, Port, these are all vendors who are actually kind of have this kind of a stuff that you can enable. So they will give you an internal developer platform, they will give you all of the automation, and then they will work with you in a professional services fashion to set up the rest of your platform workflow. Then, for example, consulting firms like us, we also do the same. We can go into and kind of help you set up the end-to-end platform. But obviously, it will need budget. You will need step by step to increase. As long as you have a thinnest viable platform, and then you kind of build on top of it, either using vendor products or kind of building it from scratch. For example, as EY, we built everything from scratch over. We started around 2018, and then we kept on kind of building. So right now our platform is extremely mature. We have a lot of offerings. So it's been around 5 years. But then, for example, when we go and we show our platform to others and they say, guys, we really want to do this, but we tell them, we also show them a slide on our journey, right? I mean, you cannot just have the outcome if you don't invest in the journey. So there is some sort of an investment effort included in having a platform. Consumption is much easier. The moment you have a good platform, adoption comes automatically. That is something I have seen on the ground.
Yeah.
Well, to quote another president, there was something that goes something like this, but the most dangerous 9-10 words in the IT vocabulary is, "Hi, I'm from centralized IT and I'm here to help." So, you got to think about the fact that there's a long history here. So I might not even show up and say we're doing platform engineering. I may just show up and say, hey, let's put everybody in a room and have a conversation about how we're going to do some efficiencies and how we're going to maybe work together. And you'll be surprised. They will come up with many of these concepts themselves because it's not rocket science at the end of the day. And then at the end of that process, you can look up and say, hey, look, Ma, no hands. We're doing platform engineering. So, you can go with a heavy hand, but, you'll probably encounter more resistance. So I think if you kind of like pull everybody in and get them to buy into a set of principles that, you label it later.
Yeah.
Yes, and I will just like to add, so the most of the 2025 companies we have surveyed, even though they don't have like traditionally what you call a platform or what kind of ticks all of the boxes of the platform definition by say CNCF or somebody, they actually already have some sort of a platform. They might be as simple as some scripts, some wrappers, abstractions around common things that they're doing, but most likely they already have. It's just that they have not come up with that kind of like that abstraction, that formal abstraction around it. So just like Mike is saying, already most likely the company where you are pitching for a platform already has some sort of a platform. It might not be a full-fledged, extremely mature kind of a platform which has a lot of self-service. For example, as EY, what we followed is that our principle was that we will automate everything, but not everything might be self-service initially. Right, but at least it will be automated. So say, for example, if it's not self-service, you will still have a way to do it via a script or APIs. It might not have a very nice fancy UI where a business user can go and deploy something, but at least it will have an automation. So it's like kind of having a thinnest viable platform and then going across. And when we went and we saw, for example, when I was in Accenture and my client actually started developing something, so they actually had similar sort of patterns in ServiceNow for other stuff. So they had automation to create mailboxes. Okay, so but they did not have an automation, for example, to create a cloud environment, just as an example, right? So there is already some sort of automation that an enterprise company which has been around for long already has. It cannot be that they're living with in a world where there is no automation, no DevOps or comparable concepts. It's just that you need to find those concepts and link it together and kind of abstract them in a way that makes sense to them, like Mike was saying.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for this awesome conversation. Thank you to everyone in the audience for hanging out with us for the last 55 minutes. Just a couple quick things before we wrap up. Please remember that the session has been recorded. So if you missed anything or just want to go back and watch us again, you will definitely be able to do so. You'll get an email in your email inbox, hopefully it comes there, with a link to view the session on demand. If you don't see it in your inbox, please check your spam folder. It will also be available on demand on devops.com. So definitely check it out. And yeah, thanks again for joining us. I'm Sharon Florentine. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Torja.
Yo, thank you,
See you all
guys.
later.
All right, folks, thanks for spending time with us. We enjoyed it. Hope
Yep.
you did too.
Thank you so much. Bye.